Hello everyone and welcome to the new Teacher Induction series. In this session, we will be learning about Assessment for Learning, AFL, or in simple words, how do we as teachers check the understanding of students. This session will approximately last for 30 to 45 minutes, which includes time for your reflection. Before I start, let me introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth Jacob and I head the Professional Learning and Development of Teachers at the Winchester School, Jebel Ali. Aims of the session. The learning intention of this session is to assess learning in a classroom and develop your responsiveness as a teacher to adjust the pace of the lesson as per the need of the learners. The success criteria, or at the end of the lesson, you will be able to identify the main principles of assessment for learning, AFL, and recognize the need to assess at regular intervals to check understanding. You can explain the need for students to self and peer assess, and you will be able to evaluate the data from the AFL to inform and modify teaching practices. If this was a live session or a face-to-face session, I would be assessing your learning through the AFL inbuilt in this session. As it's a recorded session, I would like you to identify the different AFL points in the session and evaluate for yourself the effectiveness of it. Of course, if it were a face-to-face session, you would be sharing your reflections with everyone as well. So before we start, could I ask you to maintain a small reflection journal for this session? First, take a moment to reflect on what you think assessment for learning is. Why is it important to assess the learning of students at regular intervals? And what is the difference between assessment for learning versus assessment of learning? Write it down in your journal. After which I would like you to read through the next 2 slides carefully. Now that you have read the definition for assessment for learning, I would just like to sum it up for you. So assessment for learning is an approach to teaching and learning that creates feedback which is then used to improve students' performance. Students become more involved in the learning process and from this gain confidence in what they are expected to learn and to what standard. AFL involves students becoming more active in their learning and starting to think like a teacher. They think more actively about where they are now, where they are going, and how to get there. One way of thinking about AFL is that it aims to close the gap between a learner's current situation and where they want to be in their learning and achievement. Skilled teachers plan tasks which help learners to do this. Definition for assessment for and of learning. Formative assessments are also known as assessment for learning, and summative assessment is known as assessment of learning. You can do it in 2 ways, informal as well as in the formal way. The informal for formative assessment for learning, you could do it through questioning, feedback, peer assessment, self-assessment that takes place in the lesson. A formal approach to it would be the further analysis or tests, exams, essays, and target setting. Whereas the informal route for summative assessment or assessment of learning is essays in the control conditions, portfolios, coursework, and teacher assessment. And the formal approach would be tests, exams, and essays in controlled conditions. There are 5 main processes that take place in assessment for learning. First is questioning. Questioning enables a student, with the help of their teacher, to find out what level they are at. The teacher then provides personalized feedback to each student about how to improve their learning. Students understand what successful work looks like for each task they are doing. Students become more independent in their learning, taking part in peer and self-assessment. Summative assessments, that's the student's exam or portfolio submissions, are also used formatively to help them improve. Throughout this module, you'll be encouraged to reflect upon AFL and to think about how you can integrate this into your own classroom practice. One of the most widely and successfully used tools for assessment for learning is the self and peer assessment. In self-assessment, students need to learn for themselves how they move up to the next level. They need to internalize the process. Learning cannot be done for them by the teachers. In self-assessment, a learner evaluates their own work and thinks about their own learning. This helps them to make sense of what the teacher says, relate it to previous learning, and use it for new learning as well. Ultimately, self-assessment enables learners to set their own learning goals and be responsible for their own learning. However, I want you to be aware that learners cannot become reflective learners overnight. It takes time and practice to develop these skills, and the role of the teacher is very crucial in encouraging this. Students need to learn for themselves how they move up to the next level. Peer feedback or peer assessment is the process by which learners assess each other's work and give each other feedback. This feedback is based on an understanding of what makes a successful piece of work. The teacher is vital to this process as teachers know their learners and can help them to develop their critical and reflective thinking skills. Giving learners independence is a great way to help them great way for them to take responsibility for their own learning. Peer feedback also helps learners to develop their social skills and use high-level skills such as thinking critically and analytically. A successful peer feedback session requires learners to think like a teacher for each other. Each learner will apply the success criteria to another learner's work and make value judgments based on these. The learner then has to give their partner ideas of how to improve the work. In doing this, they will be both increasing their own understanding of what makes a successful piece of work. So what you see here are self-assessment tools and peer assessment tools. So under self-assessment tools, you have rubrics, MS Forms, quizzes, and Kahoot. And peer assessment of feedback tools, you could use tools such as No Reading, Kialo, student questioning each other, or use of red and green cards. Reflection time. I would like you to pause your video for a few minutes and in your journal, write down what you have understood about assessment for learning, assessment of learning, self and peer assessment. When and how do we assess learning in a lesson? It's very important for a teacher to plan the lesson based on the needs of the students using the data available and teacher judgment, her own teacher judgment. In the sample lesson that has been shared, you can see how the tasks are differentiated and the level of challenge increases. A teacher must have a bank of resources to use in case she needs to modify the lesson based on the data she receives from the AFL. The starter or the activity that you start the lesson with could be a quick AFL or an activity that checks the prior knowledge and establishes the starting point of the students. The example cited in this session is a Year 9 English lesson, and the teacher is teaching George Orwell's Animal Farm. As you can see, the students are already halfway through the novel, and the learning objectives of the lesson are to explore the hierarchy of the farm and to assess how the original ideals of animalism have changed. The students will be able to analyze why the ideals of animalism have failed to achieve its goals and relate it to the reasons why communism failed to achieve its goals in Russia. As you can see, the task is to fill a blank pyramid based on the needs of humans. Students are expected to discuss the reasons why they rank the needs in the order they have. The teacher encourages students to give peer feedback while she endorses the feedback given, she gives her own feedback as well. This activity enables the teacher to understand if all students are able to identify the needs and compare it to the needs of the animals on the farm. The development. After each activity, you could have a small AFL to check the progress and understanding of the students. If you have just one activity, you could have a mid-plenary halfway through the activity to check the progress. In the development slide, you will see there are 3 activities and there's a feedback session after each activity with peer and teacher feedback. In the 3rd activity, as each group presents, the rest of the students evaluate the responses based on the rubrics provided. In doing this, they will be both increasing their own understanding of what makes a successful piece of work. You can clearly see how the teacher facilitates students to take responsibility for their learning and is able to develop high-level skills such as critical and analytical thinking. The final progress checkpoint is the plenary, which is a substantial activity that consolidates the learning at the end of the lesson and sets a starting point for the next lesson. In this plenary, the AFL used is the use of peer questioning and feedback by using the red and green cards. If the students agree with the answer, they raise the green card. If they disagree, they raise the red card, and the right answer is discussed. The teacher questions further if she feels the question was too simple or the answer was only partially answered. On your screen, you can see the data received after an online AFL tool was applied. So how does AFL help teachers modify their lesson? Have a look at the examples on the screen. In these two online AFL assessments conducted by the teacher, she knows how many questions each student got correct, incorrect, or left unattempted. She then is able to revisit the topic to ensure that all students have understood the concept clearly. In the next example, she is able to assess that 40% of the class got 3 or more questions wrong. This means she would need to revisit the concept again. The example shown here in this assessment was for a class of mixed ability. Assessments are differentiated for different groups of students as well. Few questions in the test or the quiz may be above curriculum standards, and the teacher would expect only students working at that level to answer those questions correctly. In the next 3 slides, you will find examples of different AFL tools that could be used to check the progress. The first one, the KWL chart, is used to check understanding. So you could start this at the beginning of the lesson. At the beginning of the lesson, as a starter, you could ask them what they know about the lesson and what they want to know about it, or what they know about the topic and what they want to know about it. And towards the end, at the plenary, you could have a recap and you could ask them what they have learned. So from what they know and what they want to know to what they have learned, and that would actually show you the progress. So please do visit the link below as well as the online AFL tools in the next slide. That will give you access to more examples of AFL tools and activities. So what are the benefits of AFL? AFL improves learners' outcome. Research shows that effective formative assessment is one of the most important contributors to the success in summative assessment. This is because the learners have a clear idea of what good work looks like and what they need to do to reach the standard. AFL increases confidence. AFL helps to create a sense of self-efficacy. That's a learner's confidence in their ability to reach targets through hard work and determination. This is an essential quality for learners to develop. Self-efficacy will help them succeed throughout their life, both professionally and personally. AFL techniques such as peer feedback can help more able learners to reinforce their learning by explaining the ideas to the less able classmates. Furthermore, peer feedback helps learners to develop diplomacy and communication skills that will be essential in many aspects of later life. AFL increases independence. AFL enables learners to become less passive in the classroom, especially when combined with other methods that promote this type of approach, such as active learning techniques. Students will develop the ability to assess themselves and take responsibility for their own learning. This supports the development of the Cambridge Learner attributes, which say that Cambridge learners are confident, responsible, reflective, innovative, and engaged. An AFL approach also helps students to become enthusiastic lifelong learners. AFL also helps teachers. When students are taking a more active role in their learning, teachers have more time to talk to them individually. In addition, teachers have more time to reflect on what is going well in their lesson and what can be improved. And finally, AFL changes the culture in the classroom. It is argued that high-achieving learners avoid taking risks because they are afraid of making mistakes. This reduces the amount they can actually learn. An AFL approach helps to create a supportive and cooperative classroom. In this environment, everyone, including the teacher, should feel able to try new things without worrying that they might fail. If the teacher presents mistakes as an opportunity for learning, this will also help students to reach their full potential. Students will start to see that by learning from failure, they can improve the outcomes in the future. Reflection time again. Read the scenario and choose the best option. You could have more than one. Write down the reasons for your option in your reflection journal. Now to check your understanding. Create questions based on assessment for learning using the question starters given below. You could use these questions to check the understanding of your colleagues during the in-school induction your school will hold in August. So pause the video now and write down the answers or the questions. I would like to leave you with 3 points that could be your key takeaways for this session. You understand the principles of assessment for learning and the process of effective learning. You are able to reflect on the role of intentional dialogue and how it supports formative assessments and learning. You know the importance of using an appropriate AFL at regular intervals to inform and modify your teaching practices. I do hope that you have now an understanding of assessment for learning and the need for every teacher to use it in the lesson. Please do fill the induction reflection booklet for this session. Looking forward to seeing you in August. Take care and stay safe. Thank you.